Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to Alta Live. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm the digital editor here at Alta Journal, and it is my job to welcome you, host you, and let you know that you are here today joining us for a discussion with writer and historian Gary Kamiya on his urban camping experience in San Francisco. If you're new to Alta Live, the concept is to take an article or subject from the magazine or our website, altaonline.com, and expand on that in a live interview. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive into Gary Kamiya's Alta Serial. Alta Serial is a 5-part series on a variety of topics. This one, that's running right now, has Gary spending 5 days and 4 nights camping, walking, and exploring San Francisco. Parts 1 through 3 are live now. Parts 4 and 5 will be published this coming Monday and the next. We're going to send you links to all of those. We'll pop them into the chat as well. But if you haven't had a chance to read parts 1 through 3 yet, I encourage you to do so. And stay tuned for parts 4 and 5. Also, Alta Serials is an ongoing series we do. So you can sign up for that free newsletter and we will keep you in the loop. A bit about our guest. Gary Kamiya is co-founder of Salon. He's a former executive editor of San Francisco Magazine and was a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. He was born in Oakland, grew up in Berkeley, and has lived in San Francisco since 1971. Gary's book, Cool Gray City of Love, 49 Views of San Francisco, was awarded the Northern California Book Award for creative nonfiction. His local history column, Portals of the Past, ran in the Chronicle, and his work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Art Forum, Sports Illustrated, Mother Jones, and many, many more. It's been anthologized in a number of publications as well. A recipient of awards too plentiful to name right now, Gary lives in Telegraph Hill, where I believe he is joining us from today. And before I let him start answering my questions, some brief Alta housekeeping. As I mentioned, Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine and website focused on California and the West. We feature Alta serials, weekly events like this, a monthly California book club, and this really beautiful quarterly magazine. You can join us for as little as $3 a month and support the work we do here. Get the magazine and much more, including a hat, a book, all sorts of fun stuff for $50 a year. If you haven't already joined us as a member, I encourage you to check out the work we do at altaonline.com, check out my interview with Gary, and consider joining us. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions for our guest. Gary and I will chat for about 30 minutes and get to as many of your questions as we can. Do not worry, this interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today. We're also going to email it to you along with a link to Gary's work in Alta, including Alta Serials, and invites to upcoming events. In fact, LA people, we've got one coming up next month, September 7th at Chevalier's Books in LA. So with that, it is so nice to see people letting us know where they are zooming in from today, everywhere from San Francisco to Maine. Please, it's great to see where people are zooming in from. I am here in Nevada in the suburbs. Gary, I know you are in San Francisco. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here, Beth. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to kind of just ask the obvious, if I may start off with the super obvious question. What prompted you to come up with this idea of backpacking across San Francisco?
Well, it's something that I've always wanted to do. And I did a few little versions of this as a very young person, sleeping out once or twice in my hometown of Berkeley under sort of odd circumstances, returning from trips. And there was always a kind of romance in my mind about finding hidey holes in a city. Just it would be, in a way, it was the culmination of years of a love affair with San Francisco. It's the ultimate hands-on, or literally body-on, as I say in the piece, a way of getting to know a city. And it was my way of, trying to be an explorer in a deeper way than I had been doing my research for my 2 books on San Francisco, and also during the years and years running up to those books where I just wandered happily around San Francisco, learning about it and trying to walk as much of it as I could. Doing this, in a way, was the ultimate extension of that, because you're not only walking in it, you're sleeping in it. And I can't deny that the sort of illicit and slightly dangerous and slightly transgressive quality of it was an attraction as well. There's definitely a little fear factor. It's a little nuts. It's not something that most people do. And that was part of the attraction, no doubt. So all of those factors, and wanting to follow in the footsteps of the great explorers of San Francisco, and just in general, I've always been a total romantic about exploration, about maps, about learning territory inch by inch. I love globes and strange outmoded maps and intricate, odd, obscure maps of San Francisco. And doing this was, a way of trying to make my own little mark, a very humble and kind of silly one in some ways, in the tradition, much more illustriously kicked off by everyone from Cabrillo, the first non-native to sail up the coast of California, right up through the present time, to friends and far more intrepid San Francisco walkers than me, like my friend Patricia, who has walked every street, every block in San Francisco, and I've accompanied her on a number of those. And so that desire for real deep engagement with the city and just wanting to have an adventure. I think at the end of the day, a lot of it, the great jazz guitarist Pat Metheny, who I know, was talking to me once about playing a gig, just playing music, and he simply said, "I hit some new notes." That was his way of summing up musical success. I think most musicians would concur. Most improvising musicians would concur. And this was my way of trying to hit some new notes, which is harder and harder to do as you get older. And I just turned 70. So that all of those things factored into this kind of wild adventure.
Before we get into any new notes you may have hit, I do want to address some feedback that we've gotten from some of our readers. And I want to represent the reader here in expressing, did you have any concern? Homelessness is a huge crisis, and very notably in San Francisco. It is absolutely a national, if not international crisis, but it is very much an important, relevant, daily topic in San Francisco. And we've received some feedback on social media and via email that you're cosplaying as an unhoused person. You are housed, you had a credit card, a per diem, you had great camping equipment. Mm-hmm. You've got a lot of people to call if you get in any trouble. You don't suffer from debilitating illness or addiction that I know of. How do you respond to that criticism and concern about this adventure taking on kind of a playing at something that's so serious and important?
Right. No, well, I understand the criticism. I guess I would say that, people have been sleeping out in cities voluntarily and not voluntarily, but especially voluntarily. There's a tradition of doing this that predates the modern phenomenon of homelessness in the US. So I had no intention whatsoever of trying to be a homeless person, of trying to play at a homeless person, even of really trying to understand in any significant way what it is like for the vast majority of homeless people to experience that. And I've reported quite extensively on homelessness. I've interviewed dozens of homeless people. I wrote a 10,000-word piece on homelessness for San Francisco Magazine. So I've studied the issue in some depth, and I'm very sensitive to it and very sensitive to the extraordinarily difficult circumstances that most homeless people find themselves in. I would add that it's interesting, the homeless population is a slightly more heterogeneous one than people sometimes think. When you begin to talk to homeless people that are unhoused, a small percentage of them are slightly closer to the way that I experienced it. In other words, they're not necessarily chronically homeless. They may not be suffering from some of the issues that unfortunately, that a large percentage of the homeless population does. There's a slightly more voluntary, adventurous, and romantic aspect. I'm not saying this is in any way the majority of homeless people for whom it's a terrible ordeal, violence, sexual violence, terrible problems beset so many homeless people. I'm just pointing out that this population is somewhat more heterogeneous than is sometimes realized. So having said that, I say, as I make it very clear in the piece, this is not intended to be, I became homeless with my credit card and my high-end camping equipment and my per diem. This is an adventure. Everyone owns this city. Homeless people have a right to be in San Francisco. The conditions under which they have the right to be here are a matter of great debate, but nobody denies that they have a right to be here. And housed people have a right to be here as well. And people have a right to adventure in the city if they don't harm anyone or do anything that damages the environment, which I was scrupulously careful not to do in any way. And so my feeling was that this was a separate, a completely separate track from that. And I understand the concern of people that think it's diminishing it, or Marie Antoinette, that's actually, I guess it was a myth. I think it was not Marie Antoinette herself who dressed up as a shepherdess, but I believe some French noble women did. And I wasn't attempting to do that. This was an adventure undertaken for its own right, for its own sake, and really anything that it sheds, any light it sheds on homelessness is glancing, particular, and not having to do with the mainstream of homelessness. So that would be my response to those criticisms.
Can you tell us now, for those who have yet to read this, I should also add, we have gotten a ton of glowing response to this and enthusiastically positive response. So if you haven't read it yet, I really encourage you to dive in and figure it out for yourself. There's also, as we can kind of follow along on your journey, a map, so you can see kind of Gary's process throughout the city with each installment. Tell us about your first night, your first night sleeping outdoors, how you were feeling about it. You were particularly nervous. Obviously, this is your first night. And you had done some recon before of potential sleeping spots throughout the city. But can you kind of set the scene for us of night number one?
Sure. I'll just start by briefly touching on what you mentioned, which is that I did rather thorough research on all of the sleeping sites. I wasn't so crazy as just to head out into the city, wander around, and as dusk approached, start looking for a place to sleep. That is not a good idea for a number of reasons, security, one of them, but also I make no bones about the fact that this was an extremely hedonistic adventure right up until the sleeping part. I mean, the walking part was rather physically rigorous, but whenever I got hungry or was thirsty, I ate and drank to my heart's content. And so one of the things that I was looking for in reconning sites was not only a secluded site, a safe site, a place where there wouldn't be other people sleeping out or as few as possible, as quiet as possible, but also a site that had some reasonable walking proximity to restaurants and bars. And so actually threading that needle, finding all of those criteria, I could probably write the world's strangest guidebook, places in San Francisco that meet all those criteria. It's pretty interesting. When you get out to the beach, there's very few, actually. So I was jumping ahead. I was thrilled to find out at, Great Highway in Terraval, you're only 2 blocks from the immortal bar, the Riptide, and there's a pretty good Mexican style restaurant out there as well. And there's great sand dunes. So that was, hit the trifecta there. But the first night, I was going in basically a big circle around San Francisco. So I started from Coit Tower. Then I went down through the Tenderloin and Civic Center and down Market, and then out along the Embarcadero, and ultimately to Dog Patch, and to this obscure little serpentinite mound that's called Irish Hill.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, most people have never heard of Irish Hill, and even people that might have seen it may not even have registered it as even being a hill. Because it's surrounded by a parking lot, a PG&E utility yard. The huge Pier 70 development is to its east, and it's only about, I don't know, I can't remember, 60 feet high, 50 feet high or something, and maybe 60 yards long. It's got some scraggly eucalyptus trees on top of it. It's got this sort of overgrown path running up it. And I knew about it, and I knew that it had this incredibly rollicking, wild history. But I hadn't thought of doing it until I went out for a wonderful walk with another great San Francisco shoe leather geographer, a real San Francisco treasure, Chris Carlson, the Found SF co-founder and Critical Mass founder, and a great bicyclist, walker, and an extremely knowledgeable man about all things San Francisco, and a delightful guy. And he knew about the location of a very famous, beautiful site. One of the most beautiful and poignant tragic stories in San Francisco is the story of Ishi, the last so-called wild Indian in North America, the last of his people, the last of the Yahi people who were died after genocidal campaigns against them by American settlers. He alone lived initially with a very few other Indians, and then ultimately just alone for years. And finally, he couldn't take it anymore and walked out onto a highway near Oroville. And by a miracle, Theodore Kroeber and other scientists burgeoning the new field of anthropology at the University of California the museum up on Parnassus at that time, they took him in and he lived there. And when Ishi was living there during the few years that remained to him, he used to go out and stay in a cave in Sutro Forest. So just for fun. I mean, he had a place to live in the museum, but he would go up there and kind of recreate his native ways. So I wanted Chris to show me this cave. I'd tried to find it before and I couldn't find it. So he was kind enough to take me up there, and we were walking around looking for Ishi's cave because I was considering using that as one of the places to sleep in my trek. It turned out that when we saw it, it was kind of below the trail, completely covered with poison oak, probably barely big enough to get in anyway. It was just completely unsuitable and pretty far off of my track also, and pretty high up. There were a whole bunch of reasons that it didn't work out. But as we were walking, I was telling Chris about my upcoming urban camping adventure. And I was saying, oh, I'm kind of looking for a place to sleep on night one. And there's the dog patch area. There was a park there near the old Esprit, but it's all locked off now. It just wasn't, I'd found another place a little bit further down, actually the Heron's Head Park. It would have been a longer, actually would have made more sense because my first night's walk was quite short, although I lengthened it by going into the Tenderloin and down the Embarcadero, down Market Street into Civic Center. But Chris was the guy that said, oh, why don't you sleep on Irish Hill? And so not only did he suggest that, he then turned me on to a wonderful essay by the Mr. Irish Hill, who wrote a fantastic essay on it on Found SF. It turns out this hill was a gold rush era, rollicking, drunken, high living, hard working home of about 1,000, mostly Irish American working men, most of whom worked at the Union Iron Works right at the base of the hill. And the hill was much bigger then. And it was like a little world unto itself. And you had to walk up 98 steps to get up to the top. And once you were up there, it was its own little hard drinking world. And they would have bare knuckle fights on Saturday night. And there are all kinds of grisly stories of people like, falling out of outhouses, which apparently were perched on the edge of the cliff, like medieval privies, and falling to their deaths, drunkenly sitting in outhouses.
No.
There was one story of a guy at a card game in his friend's house, mistaking the front door for the back door after a long night of drinking and playing cards. And he opened the door and went out to the back and just fell over an 80-foot cliff and died. So there was a lot of intense stuff up on this hill. You would never dream it now. It's just this little mound that doesn't look like anything. It's got that classic blue-green serpentinite rock. But it would turn out to be, I scouted it out with my buddy, Michael Johns, who's used to be the head of the geography department at UC Berkeley. And we went up there and it looked great. There was only one little issue, which was, it was like a knife had been stuck in the ground next to some old sleeping gear. That was a bit unnerving. But, that's understandable. Other homeless people who presumably that was who was sleeping there, need protection. And so that was probably what that was, but it didn't inspire a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings. But, one of the things that's interesting when you're scouting these places is it's very difficult to tell when you see human belongings, when you see sort of what looks like maybe old camping gear, there's garbage, there's some other more unpleasant stuff too. And you can't always tell how recent it is. Somebody might have been there 2 nights ago. They may have been gone for a month. You probably have to be more of a Sherlock Holmes of, urban archaeology to figure it out. But in any case, it looked like this was pretty old. And so I sort of marked this down. I had a little backup plan, but it wasn't, probably wouldn't have worked by the time I was going to go into that PG&E lot next door, and there was an old wooden shed there that would have been perfect to sleep in. But by the time the trek day came, that was all locked off. So things like that were always happening. But anyway, that's a long setup to answer your question that after this, first day of walking, I went and had a nice dinner, at Suvla in Dogpatch, and I had some drinks in the Dogpatch Saloon, which is a delightful place. And it was very, there was kind of a strange feeling sitting in this rather elegant, very streamlined, modern Greek restaurant, sipping a nice glass of white wine and knowing that in a few minutes I would be out in this top of this forlorn little hill. And, trying to, I had already, sussed it out and, found a decent, reasonably flat place, but you never know what's going to happen when you actually go there. And, it turned out it was fine. I put on my headlamp and I figured, well, if anybody sees this cyclopean maniac wandering up this forlorn hill in Dogpatch at 10:30 at night, they probably won't want to do anything about it. And I got up there and got in and got into my bag and arranged everything. And it was, to my great delight, because I had, by the way, done a dry run in my living room at home just to see what it was like. And so I knew that it was reasonably comfortable, but you never know what it's going to be like. And of course, I'm a pretty experienced backpacker. I sort of forgot to say that when you asked why I did this. I have my whole life, I've been backpacking in the Sierra. So that's a whole nother piece of why I was interested in this and thought it would be fun, because there's a lot of shared experiences whenever you sleep out, wherever you're doing it. There's a lot of shared commonality of that experience, and I love it. So anyway, I got up there and seemed like, I lay there, and it literally felt to me that I never slept a wink all night. I just lay there looking up. I could see the Salesforce Tower, the Bay Bridge, these kind of nameless plants in the foreground, this weird, huge building that's part of the Pier 70 development that has become this stunningly beautiful retrofitted office for some tech company. I was looking right into the window of that building, and I could see RH, the former Restoration Hardware, which is this crazily high-end place with like $30 cheeseburgers. And, I could look over and see that, and the lights were all on really late at night. I don't know why that was. I don't know if they're showing off $6,000 couches at 3 a.m. But all of this was like this strange vista lying there. And I guess I was excited and sort of stressed, and good and bad stress. That all of that was sufficiently unsettling that it didn't feel like I slept at all. So then, gets light at about 5:20 a.m. And when you're sleeping out, you tend to wake up with the light. And even if you want to sleep more, I wasn't using a tent. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. So I was just sleeping with a sleeping bag, no stuff sack, and just a sleeping bag and a ground cloth and a sleeping pad. And so it's pretty hard to sleep in a whole lot later than 5:30, just because you get nervous about being discovered. And excuse me, in my mind, if you got discovered when you're lying in your sleeping bag, it's kind of like that's the proverbial smoking gun. It would be very difficult to deny that you were sleeping. If you once you're out of it, who knows? I just walked up with this backpack to admire the view. So I hastily got out of my sleeping bag and packed up and walked down to back to the epicenter of Dogpatch in Minnesota, and whatever it is, 22nd, I guess.
Sure.
And then I got a coffee. This is the joy of the credit card was never more.
Your morning latte is kind of a thing.
Buying a $6.50 latte after sleeping out was like the greatest feeling of luxury. And then as I sat there, sitting on this middle of the intersection, because they have this slow street, so I was just kind of looking at this Dogpatch waking up, and to my great joy, I realized that I wasn't tired at all. So it was one of these strange nights where you feel like you never slept, but you must be going into these very deep sleep moments sporadically, however it worked out, because that next day, the day that followed night one, was really a killer. That was the longest and most arduous walk of all of the 5 days by far. And so thank God that first night I actually got enough sleep to function, because otherwise I would have been even more dead than I was on night two. And I was pretty fried on night two. So yeah, so that was great. And then just waking up and having the first one under my belt was a great feeling of relief and elation and weirdness, and just, it was like game on.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it is interesting to hear you also talk about there must be some kinds of like turf establishment. If someone's stuff is somewhere, and it comes up later in your series in Ocean Beach, that there's, if sites can be claimed in advance and then people kind of go and leave, I imagine that there is some sort of protocol. You're all different sorts of people sleep outside in San Francisco.
Absolutely.
And so you kind of go in without knowing the rules of you have to use your street smarts and kind of be willing to move if someone comes along and says, hey, hopefully calmly says, hey,
Yeah. It never became like an explicit issue. As you mentioned, when I was out at Great Highway in Terraval, there was one sort of declivity in the dunes where there was a fishing pole sticking out of the side of it and some kind of blanket there. And that seemed like enough of a stake claim.
Yeah.
That I didn't want to disturb it. But then luckily, when I came back, it was gone. So I felt, okay, good, I'll take it. Nobody's claiming this in any way. And yeah, and so a lot of this is very murky and amorphous. The place where I really had to change plans because of it, weirdly enough, was out on my last night in Sutro Heights Park, up above the Cliff House. There's that parapet up at the top that looks kind of like a castle, and I ended up sleeping just below it. But if you go below there's a large wooded brush area, and that is a warren of little hidey holes. And when I first was looking there, I was like, this is the greatest place ever. It's everything you want. It's like hidden behind, you can sort of camouflage the entrances to these bushes and with other bushes. And then there's like a flat place. And, and I found several great places. When I returned, I discovered that every single one of them had been inhabited and had massive amounts of garbage, and, unpleasant things there. And so I just completely rejected the idea of going into those woods at all. But it was kind of an eye-opener. I know from reporting on homeless people that there's significant number of homeless people that live out on the west side, some in Golden Gate Park and in other places. But it's not until you actually are prowling around looking for a place to sleep that you realize everyone who's sleeping out under whatever conditions they are all looking for the same things. And so you're following in the footsteps of a lot of other people. And if they get there first, then they get there first, and you're out of luck. So that it was interesting to discover, that in these rather out of the way places that you wouldn't necessarily think there'd be a lot of people had been there. Having said that, I never encountered any other people sleeping where I was in any one of the four.
I noticed that
I slept. Yeah. And when you think about it, it's like the places I chose were pretty far out there, like Irish Hill. That's not really near anything in particular. You have to climb up a hill. It requires a certain amount of, effort. Glen Canyon, which was night 2, I kind of thought that might be more likely to have people because it's so perfect. There's these little terraces behind the old Silver Tree daycare and then the summer camp that they have there about half a mile into Glen Canyon. And there's like 4 terraces going west. And I thought, oh, this is like the most perfect place to sleep, but there was nobody there. Night 3 was the beach. That was kind of the most, I get that's coming up in the serial. But that was the most thrilling and the most scary because that was the most exposed, because you're basically sleeping right out in the dunes. And there's, people walk on the dunes and on Ocean Beach all the time.
Sure.
But once again, how many people are walking on those dunes after 10:30 p.m. at night? And, nobody maybe I was lucky, or maybe that's just how it is. So I didn't encounter anyone there. And then the Sutro Heights was its own story, which I won't reveal. That'll be a spoiler.
We will
But
get
yeah,
to
it was everyone was different, and that was one of the joys of the whole trek, was knowing and then being confirmed that each one of those nights was its own little universe unto itself.
I before we run out of time, I want to touch upon a few more questions and then kind of give the audience, there's a Q&A button, or you can pop it in the chat and I will try and get to your questions. You mentioned, I think you were alluding to, where did you go to the bathroom?
Oh,
I
yes.
was worried about you the whole time I was reading this. And how was it received rolling in with a really big backpack? It's clear by Chris Hardy is contributes photography to Alta a lot. You've, Gary, worked with him before.
Yeah.
And so he kind of met up with you every day. And I mean, you can see in the Alta Serial these fantastic Chris's images of Gary trekking through the city. You had a really big backpack. I mean, if you walk into a Starbucks or whatever,
Yeah.
where did you find bathrooms? How was that situation?
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky because I was determined, not to get too graphic, but this is just part of the ethics and nature of this adventure, that I felt perfectly comfortable peeing outdoors. That didn't strike me as an issue, but any other, the other bodily function I would not do outdoors. That's unethical and unhealthy. And I actually ordered from Amazon these absurd contraptions that rejoice in the name of Biffy bags. And a Biffy bag is this kind of plastic bag that you tie around your waist, and you let nature, as the instructions say, tie it around your waist and answer nature's call. And I actually, it was not fun or pretty. At home, I tried out one of them, because I often have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, being an older guy. And so this was actually, to tell you the truth, my biggest concern about the whole damn thing was how I was going to deal with that situation in the dark. I did have a good flashlight and all that, but it was I wasn't really looking forward to that aspect of the adventure. And so luckily, I don't know what, my body must have miraculously responded to. Maybe it was the exhaustion of walking 15 and in some cases 17 miles a day, which I had not done in decades. I never had to deal with that problem. For some reason, I might have to pee in the night, but I never had to poop in the night. So that was.
I can't believe I've made you answer this question.
I know, but everyone, I've told a number of people about it. I can't remember if I asked my editor if he wanted me to write it.
But it is, I mean.
It's right. It's completely central. And since we've now broken this hallowed ground, the unpleasant things I was referring to when finding places where other homeless people slept was in fact the remnants of not using a Biffy bag. And it's not a pleasant thing to encounter. So anyway, that was, and then after that, it was just a matter of, getting up in the morning, and there's always a gas station, there's always a coffee house, a restaurant. And I had researched places that had them. The sites were reasonably close to places like that, or else you just come upon them in the course of walking. So, but there were definitely some long stretches when it was like, man, I hope some place appears soon. But, that part of it wasn't any worse than just going on a long walk under any circumstances. So there you have it. Full disclosure.
Everyone needed to know. See,
I was carrying around these damn Biffy bags, which weighed about 1/6 of my pack, and I never used the damn things.
I'm really worried that the Alta Christmas gift this year is going to be Biffy bags. All right, briefly, Gary, what was your on to kind of less disgusting topic? What was your, can you give us, you stopped at many restaurants, many bars. You had mentioned that we give a loving shout out to the Riptide earlier. What was your favorite stop, be it from exhaustion, really needing either a drink, a coffee, a meal? What was the one stop over the course of this 5 days that was the most welcome, the most sustaining food or drink experience?
Let's think about that. Well, even on day one, I had a great experience of stopping in. I think it was Frankie's. It's the little hamburger hot dog stand right near the ballpark. And that was really fun. I'd walked probably 10 miles by then, had a couple of beers, had a burger, and had the surreal experience of watching the Giants game on a screen and hearing the shouts that came from the ballpark that preceded the images on the screen by about 5 seconds. So you'd see somebody at the plate and you'd hear this shout, and then 5 seconds later, a giant would hit a home run. That was really delightful, and that was a fun place. I really one of the more less likely ones was after night 2. I had completely failed to research the coffee situation coming out of Glen Canyon, and which I couldn't believe it. I walked up there, and there's a little shopping area near the Molly Stones up there in Portola near O'Shaughnessy, and I went to there's a big gas station there, and the guy said, no, bathrooms are closed. Yeah, I was in need of both a bathroom and coffee, and then I discovered, and my purists will snort and scoff, but never has a Starbucks appeared in such a glowing light as the one on in the little Miraloma Park shopping area. That was an extremely welcome sight. And it was a very gray day. That was the day that I just was marching manfully to the west into the fog. All pretensions of having a glorious rebirth of my knowledge of San Francisco were completely gone. It was just, I'm getting to the Charlie Sava pool at 19th and Wawona and taking a shower.
Where you bathed. We should note that you bathed there. Melissa asks, how long did the planning and reconnaissance of this trip take you?
Well, not very long. I went out with I went on maybe 3 or 4 sort of casual scouting expeditions in the 4 areas. I walked, at one point I thought I might, on the last night, I might walk out to Balboa and 36th, which is where there's a little oasis of bars and restaurants. So I would do things like that, and I'd meander around the parks and various places that I was sleeping in. But I would only, a total of a few hours. And I did a little bit of recon on the actual walking, but not much. Mostly that I had walked the city so much that I pretty much knew more or less what I would be doing, and more or less how long the distances were. Although on day 2, I had never done anything like that walk. That was ridiculously long, and that was total exhaustion. But yeah, so the recon of just a few days to a total over a course of a few weeks, not that much.
I want to, for our last question, we are over time, and I'm so grateful for your openness and willingness to join us today. In episode 4, which is yet to publish, I want to read one line and ask you a question. My city has its share of poverty and despair and darkness, but seen in the right way, it is a work of art. There is and has been on the local news, the national news, this it's hotly discussed. Is San Francisco falling to pieces, incredibly dangerous, an example of everything that's wrong with a certain side of politics, with San Francisco values, etc. And you seem to make a point of eschewing that kind of throughout the piece. I'm wondering, I'm not going to ask you for your stance on the doom loop or whatever the narrative that is going around in San Francisco, but did this experience change your perspective, your view on that, on San Francisco's place in the world as a beautiful kind of beacon of a city, a flawed city, but nonetheless?
Yeah, I'm not really. And just in terms of the quote that you read, that was almost more philosophical, and it would apply to anywhere in the world, that seen with the right eyes, anywhere in the world is perfect and beautiful, no matter how many flaws it has. So that was almost more of a spiritual aspiration. I'm not claiming that I lived in that state of grace or live in it, but it was an aspirational realization that was probably heightened by this long trek. In terms of the doom loop and the horror show that is allegedly San Francisco, I mean, that's always been greatly overblown. I mean, even I walked through the Tenderloin at the beginning of my walk and the Civic Center, and yeah, saw stuff going on there like you always do. That's, if there's no question, there's serious problems, and there's crime problems and homeless crisis and drug abuse and drug substance abuse problems and addiction. But they are the idea that this is, a tsunami swamping San Francisco is absurd on the face of it. It's confined to generally. Certainly the homeless and drug crisis is confined to south of Market and the Tenderloin and certain parts of the Mission. You'll find little outcroppings elsewhere, but it's not like you walk down the street most of San Francisco and this is an issue. The big issue is the emptying out of downtown, the loss of jobs, the disappearance of so many workers, of the remote work. All of that is a far greater threat to the future viability of the city than the homeless and crime piece, which is significant and a problem, but it's been heavily overblown by the media. And yeah, just walking around, I didn't discover anything that I didn't already know.
Right.
Anybody who would think that you walk around San Francisco and sleep out and bad things are going to happen to you. Yes, bad things could happen to you because whenever you sleep out, you're putting yourself at some risk. But the idea that there's these roving bands of vandals waiting out all across town to get you is absurd. And no, in general, my feeling has always been that the city is a benign place. If you're street smart and you don't do stupid things, it's basically a benign place. And yeah, that doesn't mean that you can't get mugged or have your car broken into or have bad things happen to you. And I'm not trying to diminish that. But the overall narrative about that's being promulgated now is hysterical and overblown. And nothing that I did changed my feeling about that.
Well, I encourage everyone, if you haven't already, catch up. Alta Serial episodes 1 through 3, parts 1 through 3 are live now. Parts 4 and 5 go up in the coming weeks. We will send you links to all of those, as well as a link to this interview and upcoming events. Gary Kamiya, I'm so grateful that you took the time to join us today. Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Beth. Thanks for having me on.
And folks, I want to invite you all next week. We're going to welcome journalist Chris Roberts to tell us about the ups and downs of cannabis startup Flow Kana. He wrote a newsletter about that for Alta's free newsletter series. Check it out online. Join us for that conversation. He'll be in conversation with newsletter editor Matt Haber. Folks, Gary Kamiya, San Francisco historian, author, and urban adventurer. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Bye.
Bye.